The first shovelful of dirt hit the coffin, with a sound so soft it was almost polite. That was the cruelest part. Not the finality, not the grave, not even the fact that my husband was dead. It was how quietly the world accepted it. I stood at the edge of the grave, dressed in black that felt too thin for the cold, my hands clenched so tightly in front of me that my nails cut into my palms. The wind moved through the cemetery like it had somewhere better to be, tugging at coats, whispering through bare branches. Indifferent to the fact that Ethan Rivera, the man who once made my coffee exactly the way I liked it, was being lowered into the ground, earth to earth, the priest said, his voice steady, practiced. Ashes to ashes. I barely heard him, because my eyes were fixed on the empty space beside me. That space should have held my mother, her face tight with grief, whispering prayers she only half believed in. It should have held my father, standing stiff and silent, pretending not to cry. It should have held my sister Ava, mascara running, arms wrapped around herself for show. It should have held Mira, my best friend of 15 years, squeezing my hand, telling me I wasn't alone. Instead, there was nothing. Just cold air, just strangers, just me. I scanned the small crowd anyway, as if my family might suddenly materialize out of guilt or shame. But all I saw were Ethan's co-workers, a few college friends, his old architecture professor, and 2 neighbors who had only known him well enough to wave in passing. People who showed up. My family hadn't. They hadn't called that morning. They hadn't sent flowers. They hadn't even sent an excuse. The coffin began to descend, ropes creaking under its weight, and something in my chest twisted so sharply I had to fight to stay upright. This was it. This was the last moment my husband would exist in the world in any physical way, and the people who raised me weren't here. As the casket lowered, my phone vibrated in my hand. Once, I ignored it. Then again, I glanced down without thinking, irritation flashing before grief could stop it. Mom, we need to talk. Now, my breath caught. Another vibration, then another. The screen lit up again and again. My mother's name stacking on itself like a panic attack in text form. I unlocked my phone. 30 missed calls. 30. My throat tightened. Not with emotion, but with disbelief so sharp it almost turned into laughter. Because I knew exactly where they were. 2 towns over, at Ava's engagement party, gold balloons, white tablecloths, champagne glasses raised high, my mother wearing her favorite pearl earrings, my father making speeches, Ava glowing at the center of the room like she always did. I'd seen the photos online before I blocked everyone. They chose that over this. They chose celebration over a coffin. As the ropes slipped and the casket disappeared from view, the priest cleared his throat. Would any family member like to say a few words? The silence was so complete it felt intentional. I swallowed hard and shook my head. There's no one else? I said. The priest nodded gently, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of confusion. Maybe even judgment. He probably assumed my family had already spoken, or that they were too overwhelmed to attend. I didn't correct him. Let him believe something kinder. My phone vibrated again. Mom, please answer. This is urgent. I stared at the screen. My reflection faint and distorted in the glass. Urgent. As if anything could possibly be more urgent than this moment. As if my husband wasn't already disappearing into the ground. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket and watched the dirt fall, one shovelful at a time. And in that moment, standing alone while my family toasted to new beginnings, I understood something that sent a chill deeper than grief ever could. They weren't just absent, they were scared. The house felt wrong the second I walked inside. Not empty, wrong, like something essential had been removed, and the walls were pretending not to notice. Ethan's shoes were still by the door, one pair dusty from a job site, the other polished and untouched. His jacket hung over the chair like he might reach for it any second. The faint scent of his cologne lingered in the hallway, cedar and something warm I could never name. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and stood there, staring at nothing. Waiting for the sound of his voice. It didn't come. I moved through the room slowly, as if sudden motion might disturb whatever ghost remained. The living room couch still held the shape of where he used to sit. The coffee table still had a folded blueprint from a project he never finished. In the kitchen, his mug sat in the sink, coffee dried along the rim. I picked it up. My hand started shaking so violently I had to set it back down before it shattered. Grief arrived then, not as a wave, but as pressure. Heavy, crushing, sitting on my chest until breathing felt optional. I slid down against the cabinet and sat on the floor. No tears came. I'd cried too much already. At the funeral, at night, in the shower, into pillows that still smelled like him. Somewhere along the way, my body had decided enough was enough. The phone buzzed again. I didn't look. I already knew it would be my mother, or my father, or Ava, or Mira. All people who had chosen not to stand beside me when it mattered most. I slept on the couch that night. Or rather, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying memories I hadn't asked for. Ethan laughing when I burned dinner. Ethan holding my face when my father told me I was too emotional. Ethan whispering, just days before he died, "Something's wrong with your family, Lena." I'd brushed it off. "They're complicated." I'd said. "They don't mean harm." He hadn't argued. Just looked at me like he wanted to say more, but didn't. The next morning, I listened to the voicemails. My mother cried. A lot. My father sounded annoyed, more than worried. Ava sounded irritated, like my silence was an inconvenience. Mira sounded rehearsed. "Why, I just need to explain," she said softly. "You don't have the full picture?" That sentence lodged itself in my chest, because explanations are what people offer when the truth is ugly. Days passed, then weeks. I stopped responding entirely. I stopped leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. Food lost its taste. Music hurt too much. Silence hurt worse. One afternoon, while packing Ethan's things, because everyone insisted I had to, I found a folder tucked behind old blueprints in his office. It wasn't labeled. Inside were documents. Financial statements tied to my father's company, email chains marked confidential, legal drafts with my sister's fiancé's name on them, and notes in Ethan's handwriting, shell accounts, bribes, cover-ups. My pulse thundered in my ears. This wasn't coincidence. This was motive. Ethan hadn't died randomly. He'd found something. Something dangerous enough that my family chose an engagement party over his funeral, and then panicked when I stayed silent. I sat on the floor. Papers spread around me like evidence at a crime scene, and finally understood the shape of my grief. It wasn't just loss. It was betrayal, and it was deep enough to kill. The knock came at 7:18 p.m. I remember the time because I had just turned off the stove. The soup I'd made was untouched, cooling in the pot, forgotten the moment the sound echoed through the apartment. 3 sharp knocks, controlled. Confident, not apologetic. My stomach tightened. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Mira. I stood still for several seconds, listening to my own breathing, to the distant hum of traffic outside, to the way my heart seemed to beat louder than it should. A part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home. Another part, smaller, colder, wanted to see her face. I opened the door. She stood there dressed in soft gray, the color people wear when they want to look gentle. Her hair was pulled back neatly, makeup minimal, eyes slightly red like she'd practiced crying before coming over. "Lena," she said quietly. "I've been worried." I stepped aside without a word. She walked in like she belonged there, like she hadn't stood beside my sister 2 towns away, while my husband was buried. She glanced around, taking in the half-packed boxes, the absence of life. Her gaze lingered on Ethan's photo on the shelf. "I'm so sorry," she said. The words floated uselessly between us. "For what?" I asked. She hesitated. Just a fraction of a second too long. "For everything." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You mean for missing the funeral?" Her eyes flicked up. That wasn't. Or for choosing Ava's engagement party? I continued, my voice calm, detached. Or for not calling until my phone was lighting up like I'd committed a crime? Mira sighed, the sound heavy and practiced. It wasn't my decision. That's funny, I said. Because no one forced you to go. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like the walls might be listening. Things are complicated, Lena. There are consequences you don't understand. I studied her face. This was the woman who knew my secrets. The woman who held my hair when I was sick. The woman who cried with me when Ethan proposed. And yet, something about her now felt foreign. Tell me, I said. What consequences? She swallowed. You shouldn't be digging through Ethan's things. The air shifted. I felt it. A pressure change, like before a storm. You went through my house, I asked. Her eyes widened. No, that's not what I meant. But the damage was done, you know? I said slowly. That's the thing about lies. They always assume the other person is stupid. She reached out, touching my arm. Lena, listen to me. I'm trying to protect you. I laughed. It came out sharp. Uncontrolled. Protect me. I repeated. You abandoned me at my husband's grave. Her voice dropped. Because if we hadn't, people would start asking questions. The room went silent. I felt my pulse in my ears. What questions? I asked. She looked away. That was all I needed. Did Ethan die because of my family? I asked quietly. Mira didn't answer. Her silence screamed louder than any confession. I took a step back, suddenly unable to stand so close to her. Get out. Lena, get out. Her face crumpled. You don't know what you're doing? I met her gaze, something cold settling behind my eyes. Neither did you. She left without another word. I locked the door, turned the deadbolt, pressed my back against it and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My hands shook, not from fear, from clarity. Ethan hadn't been paranoid. He had been hunted, and the people I trusted most had chosen silence over truth. That night, I didn't cry. I gathered the documents I'd found. I spread them across the table. I read every line until the words burned themselves into my memory. Then I did something I'd never done before. I stopped hoping. Hope is what keeps victims patient. And I was done being patient. Revenge doesn't begin with anger. It begins with control. The first thing I did was disappear, not dramatically, not suspiciously, quietly. I changed my number, closed my social media accounts, stopped using my married name in public records where I could. I moved out of the apartment Ethan and I shared, the place everyone knew, and into a small studio across the city under my maiden name, Lena Whitmore, a name my family hadn't bothered to think about in years. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Let them wonder. Let them panic. Then I started rebuilding myself from the inside out. I enrolled in online courses, corporate law, forensic accounting, compliance auditing. I learned how money moves when it doesn't want to be seen. How companies hide crimes behind subsidiaries and shell corporations. How executives speak when they're lying. At night, I watched interviews, court footage, whistleblower testimonies. I learned patience. I learned silence. I took a job that looked insignificant, a junior administrative role at a consulting firm that handled compliance reviews for companies like my father's. The pay was modest. The title forgettable. Perfect. No one questioned my presence. No one noticed when I stayed late. No one cared when I volunteered to organize files, manage databases, or sit in on meetings, just to take notes. I listened. I watched. I copied. Every document that passed through my hands became a piece of a larger picture. Physically, I trained too. Not because I planned to fight, but because strength changes how you carry yourself. I took boxing classes, learned how to absorb impact without panic, how to breathe through pain. Emotionally, I became disciplined. I didn't react to my mother's messages when they started again. Long, desperate texts asking where I was, why I wouldn't answer. I didn't respond when Ava showed up at my old address, crying for the neighbors. Silence became my weapon. Months passed. Then a year. I watched from a distance as Ava's wedding plans filled magazines, as my father gave interviews about family values, as Mira was promoted to senior legal advisor. They believed I was broken. They believed grief had swallowed me whole. What they didn't realize was that grief had sharpened me. By the time I was ready to make my first move, I wasn't angry anymore. I was precise. Because revenge, when done right, doesn't scream. It whispers. I didn't attack them directly. That would have been satisfying, but short-lived. Instead, I stepped into their world like a shadow they couldn't quite see, but could always feel. Evermont Group, my father's company, operated on polished surfaces and hidden rot. Glass buildings. Clean mission statements. Charity galas where executives smiled for cameras while burying lawsuits under settlements and non-disclosure agreements. I learned their language. Words like restructuring, compliance review, risk mitigation. Polite phrases used to mask panic. My job placed me on the edges of their operations. Consulting teams, audits, regulatory reviews. I wasn't important enough to be remembered, but I was useful enough to be present. That's where the cracks began to show. Executives spoke differently when they thought no one significant was listening. Voices dropped. Jokes turned nervous. Emails became cautious. I noticed patterns. Shell companies in offshore accounts that moved money in clean circles. Construction projects approved too quickly. Safety violations quietly resolved after workers were injured or killed. And always, the same names appeared in the margins. My father, Ava's fiancé, Daniel, and Mira, approving documents with a signature that never trembled. The first move was small, anonymous. I sent a packet of documents to an investigative journalist known for corporate exposés. Not enough to destroy Evermont, just enough to raise eyebrows. A week later, an article appeared. Questions raised over Evermont's subsidiaries' safety practices. The stock dipped slightly. Nothing dramatic, but inside the company, alarms rang. I watched it happen in real time. Emails marked urgent. Meetings called after hours. Executives whispering in hallways. My father gave a calm interview, dismissing the concerns as routine misinterpretations. But I saw his hands shake when the cameras weren't rolling. The second move followed a month later. Another leak. Different angle. Different reporter. This one focused on financial irregularities tied to Daniel's development projects. That article hit harder. Regulators requested audits. Banks started asking questions. I attended a compliance meeting where Daniel sat stiffly at the table, jaw clenched, fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. I almost didn't recognize him. The man who once toasted his engagement with champagne now looked like someone waiting for a verdict. Our eyes met briefly. He didn't recognize me. Good. Fear began to seep into their lives slowly, like water through hairline cracks. Ava postponed her wedding due to stress. Mira canceled public appearances. My mother stopped posting photos. And then, I did something reckless. I attended a charity gala, Evermont's annual fundraiser. I wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, my hair pulled back, professional, invisible, until I wasn't. I watched my mother across the room, laughing too loudly. My father surrounded by donors. Ava clinging to Daniel's arm. Her smile brittle. Mira stood near the bar, scanning the room like prey. When her eyes landed on me, her face drained of color. She froze. I met her gaze and smiled, just slightly. Her glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. The sound cut through the room like a gunshot. People turned. She knelt quickly, apologizing, shaking. I walked past her without a word. That night, my phone rang for the first time in over a year. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Mira's voice followed, cracked, desperate. Lena, please. We need to talk. I deleted it. Let the silence answer. Once fear takes root, it grows fast. The audits turned aggressive. Investigators requested original records, not summaries, not explanations. That's when the real damage began. Because originals don't lie. Shell companies were exposed. Payments traced. Emails recovered that had been accidentally deleted. A former Evermont accountant came forward anonymously. Then another. Whistleblowers always wait until someone else speaks first. The dam broke quietly, then all at once. News outlets picked up the story. Evermont under federal investigation. Executives named in expanding corruption probe. My father stopped giving interviews. Daniel's projects were frozen. Mira was suspended pending investigation. I watched the collapse like a slow-motion film. Not with joy, with focus. One evening, my father appeared outside my building, older, smaller. His hair more gray than I remembered. He waited. I didn't open the door. My mother followed days later, crying in the lobby, begging neighbors to help her find me. I stayed invisible. Because now they were experiencing what I had, isolation, fear, the world turning its back. Daniel was arrested first. Fraud, bribery, conspiracy. The image of him being led into a courthouse in handcuffs went viral. Iva disappeared from public view. My father resigned from Evermont, effective immediately. The board issued statements distancing themselves from him. I knew what that meant. Sacrifice the king to save the kingdom. But kingdoms built on rot don't survive long. The final leak came from me. The last thing Ethan had compiled, internal emails explicitly discussing, handling, Ethan Rivera, not an accident, a liability, a problem to be solved. The backlash was immediate. Federal charges followed. Mira was named. My father was named. Their power, carefully built over decades, collapsed in weeks. And still I waited. Because there was one conversation left to have. And it didn't belong in a courtroom. The cemetery was empty when I arrived. That wasn't an accident. I had chosen the time carefully, early morning, just after dawn. When the world is quiet enough to hear your own thoughts, but bright enough that nothing can hide in shadows. Ethan's grave sat beneath a pale sky, the grass still damp with dew. I stood there for a long moment, hands in my coat pockets, breathing slowly. I'm not finished yet, I said quietly. But I'm close. Footsteps crunched behind me. I didn't turn. I knew you'd come here, my mother said. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Older, worn down by weeks of fear and unanswered questions. My father stood beside her. Ava lingered a few steps back, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Mira arrived last, her face drawn, eyes rimmed red, not from tears, but from sleepless nights. No one spoke for a long moment. The wind moved through the trees, whispering like it had that day at the funeral. Why here? Ava finally asked, her voice sharp with resentment. Why drag us to this place? I turned then. This is where you should have been, I said. From the beginning. My mother's lips trembled. We didn't know it would turn into this. I let out a slow breath. You knew enough. My father straightened his shoulders, instinctively trying to reclaim authority. Ethan involved himself in matters that were dangerous. He made choices. So did you, I replied. Mira stepped forward, hands clasped tightly. Lena, I swear I tried to stop it. I looked at her, really looked at her. The night he died, I said. You were the one who warned me not to ask questions. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself. Her composure cracked. We thought we could handle it quietly, my father said. It was supposed to be an accident. The word hung in the air. Accident. Ava gasped softly. Dade L. My father didn't look at her. He was going to expose everything. The company. The family. We would have lost everything. I laughed. It was hollow. You lost everything anyway, I said. You just delayed it. My mother reached out, stopping inches from my arm. Please. He's gone. What good does this do now? I stepped back. It tells the truth, I said. And that matters. Ava's voice rose, raw and furious. You destroyed my life. I met her gaze steadily. No. You built your happiness on someone else's grave. She slapped me. The sound echoed across the cemetery. For a moment, no one moved. I touched my cheek slowly, then looked back at her. That, I said calmly, was the last thing you'll ever take from me. Sirens sounded in the distance. Mira looked around in panic. What did you do? I told the truth, I said. Everything. To everyone. Police cars appeared at the entrance to the cemetery. My father's face collapsed. My mother sobbed. Mira dropped to her knees. I turned back to Ethan's grave as officers approached. I hope it was worth it. My father whispered. I didn't answer, because the question wasn't for me. The trials lasted months. Long enough for the public to forget the early outrage and move on to the next scandal. Long enough for the truth to settle into court transcripts and legal language that stripped it of its emotional weight. My father was sentenced. Mira lost her license and her freedom. Daniel accepted a plea deal. Evermont dissolved, its name becoming shorthand for corruption in business schools. Ava moved away, changed her name, tried to disappear the way I once had. My mother wrote letters. I never replied. In the end, revenge didn't feel like victory. It felt like quiet. The kind that comes after a storm has torn everything down and left the landscape unrecognizable. I sold the house Ethan and I had shared, kept only a few things: his watch, his notebook, the blueprint he never finished. I moved again, not to hide this time, but to live. On the anniversary of his death, I returned to the cemetery. I placed a single white rose on his grave. They won't hurt anyone else, I said softly. I made sure of that. The wind stirred, gentle this time. I stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked away. Not because I was finished remembering him, but because I finally knew how to live with the memory. Revenge didn't bring Ethan back, but it gave his death meaning, and sometimes that has to be enough.